Okay, so we're going to talk about presentation guidelines, and this is the makeup class because we were unable to look at projects because of a holiday. So I'm just going to go through this. So first of all, start with the end. What is your goal? Why are you giving this presentation? What do you want the audience to remember after your presentation? So think about what your goal is for this, and what is your motivation for this presentation, okay? Now think about your audience. Who are you talking to? Of course, you'll be talking to me, and you'll be talking to other students. So make sure that you use the correct kind of language so that we can understand what you're talking about, okay? Think about the content of this presentation. Make sure the content can connect with people in the classroom. Don't think of all the details, just the general things, and think about layman's terms, not complex words. Make sure it's simple so that people like myself can understand, especially if it's about your major, because I probably haven't studied your major and probably don't know the vocabulary that you use in your major. So try to make it in layman's terms. So make sure when you do your planning, use a pen and paper to work out what you want to say. Use simple PPT designs so that it's easy for you to prepare well. Make sure your voice is clear and a good structure. Make sure it's logical, and make sure you've got an understanding of the flow of the presentation. People need to know where you're going in the presentation. And when you do it, think about the what question. So what? Why am I doing this? If you can't answer that question, take it out. Just ask yourself, why is this so important to the presentation that I'm doing right now? Here's a test. Imagine you have to pitch a new idea to the head of a marketing department. He is busy and can only talk in an elevator. Can you sell your idea in 30 to 45 seconds? So you've got to summarize this idea as much as you can to make it easier for somebody else to hear you. So it's important to know how to tell stories. And stories are easier for people to listen to. They're interesting, they're engaging, they're logical, and they're clear. So maybe think about storytelling as a way to do this presentation. Practice makes perfect. If you know what you're doing, and when you do your presentation you're clear, then it's going to be much better received from me and from other people. So have a bit of a practice with your presentations. It's not always easy, but try that. Let's think about presentation guidelines. Your posture, your eye contact, and your gestures. Do you have the correct posture? Do you have the correct eye contact and the correct gestures when you're doing your presentation? This is something we are going to talk about now. Firstly, let's just outline the three areas we'll look at. Posture is how you present your body. Eye contact is the way you look at other people, and gestures is what you do with your hands and how you gesture with other people. So with posture, how do you stand? Are you confident in the way that you stand? And if you are, that will really help people to engage with your presentation. If you are confident and show that in your stance, people will listen to you more. And having a good posture means you need to stand up straight, but be relaxed and natural. and have your feet apart and your shoulders square, and face the audience. Don't face away, don't be shy, but look strong. Have a power stance, you know, use that power stance to control the audience. Don't slouch. Some people are very bad at posture. They lean against things and they're stiff and they look uncomfortable. I don't know if you've seen that, but when you're doing a presentation, try not to slouch and look too relaxed or lean on things. This would not look very presentable. Why is it important? It's about your attitude. It's about demonstrating your attitude to others when you present your when you do your presentation, when you present your project. You need to make yourself look attractive. You need to stop people from feeling distracted. You need to get people to focus on you. Eye contact is also important. You need to look at people in the audience and don't just stare, but look around, and don't just look at your notes, but look at other people so that they can see that you're interested in them. Show them your eyes. Look at different people. And using your gestures, like using your hands and your head movement and your arm movement, this will reinforce your words, and it will make your presentation more interesting. They're visuals and they reinforce your words, so try to use them in that way. You can emphasize points with your hands and eyes. Take your hands out of your pockets. Don't put them in there. Don't fold your arms. Avoid looking nervous. Using your hands in a way that gets people to think about what you just said is very important. And they should be varied. Don't use the same ones. Repetition can be distracting, and some people feel distracted and it can interfere with their ability to pay attention to you. So try to be careful about your hand gestures. They are useful, but make sure they are not too overbearing. You can use them for emphasis and focus, to sequence things, for comparison and contrast, to illustrate, and for and point to locations. There's a lot that can be said with gestures. So gestures are in itself are kind of like a language. And you can show emphasis, you can reinforce a word, and this will help the audience to realize that this point is essentially important. So some words might be crucial to your presentation, and you really want the audience to remember those words, so you emphasize those words using your gesture. And then you can show a sequence, you can show a process, and you can help the audience to remember an important number. If there's a timeline in what you want to say, it's important to use your gestures to focus on numbers and sequences, and that's easily done in a presentation. And then if you want to make the audience visualize a size and a shape and a dimension, then we can use your hands and gestures in such a way as to help them understand what you're trying to say, help them to understand the size and the shape, and to focus on that rather than being distracted by the word. And it can help people to compare things and to contrast. What are the similarities between the two things that you're trying to say? What are the differences? How about the changes that have happened over time? You could use your gestures to sort of help people to understand those changes. And just work with, if you can, work with a partner. Find a partner, and they must guess the sentence on the PPT. A must look at B's gestures and body language. So this is kind of like a game where A and B work together to guess each other's gestures. You'll need to work with a partner for this. Okay, so someone stands with their back to the PPT. Person A will stand with their back to the PPT, and person B will look at the PPT screen and give clues. So it's kind of like a guessing game with gestures, and you need to see if you can guess what they're trying to say. So there's a picture there to show you what student A needs to do, and there's student B in that diagram. You can see behind the whiteboard are 4 words, and student B describes to student A what's there, and student A has to guess the sentence. Okay, and so here's a group 1 statements. I don't understand. So the other student needs to guess this. So if you work in twos, one of you can have your backs to the PC, the other person could be looking at the words and describe the words using gestures only. So how would you say I don't understand? Now it's time to change roles. Student A, you now look at the PPT. Student B, now you look at your partner. Student A will give clues to student B, and we're going to do the same thing using gestures to try to describe a sentence to see if the other student can guess what you're trying to say. So there's the list there, 1 to 8, and the one student, if you could try to gesture what they mean, and the other person will try to tell you in English what it is. It's kind of like a guessing game using gestures. If you could do that, that will help you to understand the importance of gesture. So we've talked about posture and eye contact and gestures and how they're important in understanding how to do presentations. So make sure you focus on them when you prepare for your presentation. Now I want to talk about voice inflection and word stress. So voice inflection and word stress are a very important part of doing a presentation. You want to make sure that your meaning comes across correctly and that you sound passionate about what you want to say. So stress is used to emphasize important points, and so you need to make sure that when you communicate with each other you use these things. So voice inflection means how your voice changes. So we're not robots, and we don't speak like Steve Hawking, and our voices go up and down, and we use voice inflection as we do with gestures to clarify, to emphasize. And you can change the sound of your voice by changing the stress of a word or phrase. You could stretch the word, and you can use pausing for effect, and a lot of people use pausing to, especially in humor, when they use humor they use pausing. Okay, so stressing, this is when your voice goes up and back down, and this is a very important issue. So you're using the stress to emphasize a word or a phrase, and this helps for you to communicate more clearly. And stretching is when you make the word longer. So in this one, this is a very important issue, and so I think you also do that in Korean. You stretch the word to make it more clear to the listener. Okay, that's what you're emphasizing. And then pausing is when you take a short pause before you say a word or a phrase. So this is a very important issue. So there's a kind of pause there, and it's for emphasis, and it sounds more dramatic and much more emotional, filled with emotion. And inflection, voice inflection, has 3 types: stressing, stretching, and pausing. So we talked about those already. So when you do your voice inflection, think about how you can stress the word, how you can stretch the word, or how you can pause before the word just to get the emphasis. So practice with a partner, practice the different types of voice inflection, use each type for each sentence. So I want you to do stressing. You can see there's the arrow. Stretching has got the line underneath, and pausing has got the dot dot dot. Okay, so when you see these, try practicing. Dongguk, here's the first one. Dongguk is over 100 years old, so that's stressing. Dongguk is over 100 years old, that's stretching. Dongguk is over 100 years old. There's the pause. You can do that with the others. Why don't you practice those? And here's some action words. We need to change our ways. So there's the stress. We need to change our ways. There's the stretch. We need to change our ways. There's the pause. So I like the pause the best. Kind of sounds cool. And descriptive words as well. Lotte World Tower is huge. Or Lotte World Tower is huge. Or Lotte World Tower is huge. Attitudes are slowly changing, so there's the pause. And then comparison words. A has more customers than B. A has more customers than B. A has more customers than B. So there's that pause in there. So I think pause is the most fun. I like pausing a lot, and you could do that with the least popular ski park is jump, jump, jump. Okay, and you can also keep practicing that one with the others. Our swimming pool is longer than all our competitors. Now we're going to talk about the introduction of a presentation, and we have 3 parts, and this is one of the parts of the presentation. This is the introduction, and why this is important is we really need to introduce our topic and what we're going to say to the listeners. So you got to introduce yourself, and that will help you get people's attention. You need to tell them what you want to say, and importantly, why you want to say it. You need to outline the key points, and then you need to show some transition at the end. So when you introduce yourself, first of all, I want you to give only relevant details. Don't go on too long. Make it as short as you can. Keep it short, and make sure your language isn't complex and too difficult for people. Make it simple. Then I want you to get people's attention by using the beginning of your speech to make your audience interested in your topic, like a hook. Here you can use quotes and jokes, stories, facts, figures, and rhetorical questions. I personally prefer stories because they kind of really are interesting when you have a story. And then what is the structure of your introduction? So I want to talk about these 5 points here. The first is the greeting, then what you're going to say, then why you're saying it. Then I want to outline your key points. So there'll be 3 key points here, main point 1, 2, and 3, and then the transition at the end into the next part. So what is it you want to say? So there's 2 things you need to think about here. First of all, explain the topic as simply as possible. Avoid complex languages. Don't make it too complex, and give examples that will allow them to easily understand. So it's simplify what you're doing. Why you're doing this? Okay, again, 2 things I want to say. Explain why you're giving this presentation. Give them the reason for the presentation. What are you doing it for? And then tell them why they should listen to the speech. Why is it important to them? Why is it relevant to them? What can they get from this? And then outline the key points. Make a list of the key points. Put them in logical order. There's chronological order, which is time, order of importance, and increase in strength from low to high. Try not to use complete sentences on your PPT. Make it visually interesting. And the transition words allow the audience to understand when you are changing topics. So make sure you use the correct type of words. And there's we'll talk about transitions at another time, but transition words will help you go from one sentence to the next and one paragraph to the next, okay? And that will keep people interested continually in that. Now, when you think about what useful expressions you could use, here's 4 of them for the what. I'm going to talk about economics in South Korea. I'd like to talk to you about how Samsung is doing in this country, etc., etc. for the why, you can use statements like, this information will help you to understand how to stay safe in an economic crisis. After this speech, you will be able to teach others how to be economically eco-friendly. Okay, that's just an example. And for the overview, here's another useful expression. I'm going to talk about 3 things. These things include coronavirus, the economic situation in Korea, and how to save money. So it's good to sort of use these expressions to sort of get people thinking about what you're going to say. And when you're using the tense, think about the grammar here. What kind of tense will you use? During the introduction, it's normal to use the future tense, such as I will or I'm going to. So this is leading into your presentation, so it's good to use future tense in this situation. Now I want to talk about the next part of the presentation, which comes after the introduction, which is the body. The body is the middle part of your presentation, and this is where all the details are. So you've introduced the topic, now you're going to unpack it and talk about it in more detail. So review. In the introduction, you gave your audience the main points in the overview. In the body, you will expand each point in much more detail. So as I said before, this is about details, this is about talking exactly more about what your topic is, getting people thinking more about your topic. And so with the structure, you've got, in this structure you can see there are 3 main points. Main point 1, main point 2, and main point 3, and each main point has evidence and transition. So the transition talks about going to the next part of the assignment. And then if we just have a quick overview of this, the main points are repeating the ideas from the overview, okay? Evidences are providing facts and figures to support your idea, like using quotes from journals, and then transitions connect the main points. And so for the main points, the first thing to do is repeat the main ideas from the introduction, use words and expressions that tell the audience that you are discussing a new topic, so things like first, to begin with, I should say. And so basically you want people to know the main ideas of what you're saying, okay? Then giving evidences, examples and figures, which really makes your strong point, makes your point much stronger than it would be without this. As I said before, evidence can be from newspapers, journals, books, your own research, any kind of research, any kind of evidence to back it up. And this can be, you can take figures, and because they're measurable and they give you numbers, and you can think of more just normal examples, things that are not related to numbers but just qualitative, not quantitative research, and looking at what things are and their values. Transitions connect the ideas, so usually it's a chronological order from the past to the future. So you can see there, first I'd like to say, second I want to talk about, next I'd like to, then, okay? And so I showed you A, now I will discuss B. So there's those transitionals, okay? Then often we repeat things, repeat the 3 stages for each main point that you will discuss. So the main points, evidences, and traditions. We do this to highlight the points that we've made already, and we just want to confirm it with them and just tell the audience what we've said already, so it's stuck in their mind so that they can remember it. And then there's 4 types of speeches. You've got informative speech, demonstrative speech, persuasive speech, and inspirational speech. And I think we'll discuss those 4 types now. And I've put the first one as informative speech, and that's the most common. And I think it's about giving information, it's giving new information to the audience so that they're clear about what's going on and they easily understand it. Like, oh, I want to talk about coronavirus and what it does to the lungs, so you're giving information. And then demonstrative speech is where you show someone how to do something. I want to show you how to use a computer program or some other software or hardware, and it's like through different stages, like giving an instruction to somebody. And then there's persuasive speech, usually used in politics or religion, I suppose, as well. And you're trying to change people's minds. You're trying to change the way people think about things. I want to persuade you that America is actually not a bad country. And so here you use causal adverbs. Positive and negative adjectives are used a lot. Inspirational speeches are to motivate so that people will follow their dreams. And, you know, Gandhi is the great motivational speaker, right? Obama's considered to be one. And they give inspirational speeches that tell stories and make people hopeful about the future, and it's very emotional. So there is no specific tense that you use during the presentation, but I think it says here, and I kind of agree, present tense verbs are probably the most commonly used. They are the best used in presentations, I think. And now I want to talk about the conclusion. So we've looked at the introduction and we've looked at the body, and the conclusion, of course, comes at the end of the presentation. And I think this is probably something people like to do first. They in fact do the main body at the end, because they want to know the beginning and the end and just fill in the middle bit. And I think knowing the conclusion and the introduction helps make the main body more effective. So in the introduction you gave your audience the main points. In the body you expanded each point in much more detail. So I think the introduction is simplified. The body is much more complex. There's much more detail. More things want to be said, but in the conclusion it's a review of what's been said already. So almost similar to the introduction, there's a summary, and then there's an emphasis on things that are important, that you really want people to recall to their mind. So that's really key. So when you structure your conclusion, you need to break them down into the 3 points that you've talked about in 3 or 4 points in your presentation, and then put inside those 3 points the emphasis of each point, just to make that clear, just to give people something to remember. And you can summarize the main points quite simply. So summaries, just a shortened version of the main ideas, and this will act as a reminder to the people. So you know, when you read a book, at the end you always get the summary. It's so helpful to have that. And when you emphasize the evidence, you choose the evidence that you think is the most significant. So you should focus on the figures and the facts that are the biggest evidence for your proof, you know. So some evidence that's really going to be tangible and stick to the person's mind. So you can also ask questions, give the suggestions to the audience, and these questions can make them think more deeply about the topic. You don't have to have answers for these questions. You know, a question might be, so do you think God exists? Something like that. Do you think the Big Bang is right? Okay, and then useful expressions. So when you review things, here's some useful expressions. You can look at this one. I talked about 3 points. I talked about the Big Bang, I talked about evolution, and I talked about quantum physics. Something like that. And you can continue with that review in that way, and there's some other examples there. And typically it says here that you use the past tense during the introduction. Okay, so the first one says, I told you about evolutionary theory. I talked about the Big Bang. I told you about Buddhism and Christian faith. Something like that. Now we're going to talk about effective visuals and how important they are in a presentation. And obviously when I think effective, I mean it works well, of course. Effective means to work well, and visuals means what do we see in our presentation? And in this presentation it's a little bit simple, but there are some pictures, but you want something effective that really hits people hard when you do your presentation. So when you're thinking about this, we're going to look at keeping it simple, the 6x7 rule, the size of the pictures, how controlled it is, and the images we want to use. Make sure the images are useful and effective. So here's a simple and general guide. Keep it simple, keep your PPT simple, make sure it supports what you want to say. You don't want it to be explaining everything, not too much writing. They want to hear it from you, not read it off your PPT. Okay, so and then when you use your colors, I think color choice is quite key as well. It says here try to use only 2 colors, which is good. And they say use a dark background with light text or a light background with dark text, and avoid pictures as backgrounds as they can be distracting. So I think pictures are nice, but they can also distract people. Then it's crucial also to make sure your font is good. So you can use one font, I think, is enough. I personally prefer Arial, that's what I use, and that's one of the ones there. Bold is good, I like bold, I like italic, and I like to underline things. So yeah, think about that. And the 6x7 rule, a maximum of 6 words per line, a maximum of 7 lines per slide. So that's still quite a lot. I personally wouldn't do that, but it makes it easier for reading. And then they've given you an example here. I personally wouldn't put so much writing on there. I'd use visuals a lot and talk a lot. So here there's too much text. It's saying it's too much text there. Yeah, way too much text. I personally wouldn't use that much. You can see I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, and some of them are 7 words, so they say that's too much. Here's a better example, just the basic information. In this one you've got bullet points, 3 bullet points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, and I think the most per line is about 4 words. So that's really simple, really easy to use. And if you're using a TV screen, we're not. Oh yes we are, we're using a TV screen. We're not using a projector. Make sure your font is big enough. I think because we're using a TV screen in the classrooms, I think most of the time, maybe sometimes projector, think about the size of the font. And your animation should be simple. You should control what the audience sees and hears. You can use animation, I think, a lot, and make the relevant information appear as you talk about it, so like it pops up onto the screen or something. I think animations are good. So when you're using the images, avoid using PowerPoint clip art because it's a bit low quality. Try to find some good high quality images online. Avoid the copyrighted ones and the ones with the watermarks on, and just use imagery to discuss your topic more. Use photographs and illustrations. I love maps and things like that, and tables. It kind of helps. And some good photographs. If you're good at photography, maybe make your own photographs for that. That really makes it sort of shine a bit. It's a bit better, you know. And maps are great. I love diagrams. I think any diagram in a PPT is fantastic if you can make it big and put it out there on the picture and then discuss it rather than have all the writing. I think it makes it much more interesting. I think it's better. And then you can use graphs as well. I really love using graphs and tables and pie charts. Again, it's just so visual and colorful, and there's less writing because of it, and you can do much more explanation. You're kind of put on the spot and you have to talk about them, which is great. So if we look at these pictures, we can see there's a pie chart right there with 3 colors, really nice colors, kind of beautifully designed, and that really helps, especially if it's big and it's on there and then you're there just explaining it. And again, on the other side, on the right here, there are some bar charts, and that's also a great way to communicate. And horizontal bar charts are great for quantities, and then there's line charts to show trends, you know, and I think it's a good way to help people understand, you know, especially when you're talking to a student and other students who perhaps don't fully understand your major. Okay, you can also use videos and audios, but I personally wouldn't want you to use too many videos, okay, and I would keep it very, very short and not too long. Just it's about presentations. I don't want you just putting on a video. It's distracting and it's not good. Okay, so here's what we've been through. We talked about keeping it simple. We've talked about the 6x7 rule. Make sure the size of the font is good. Make sure the animation is controlled, and think about your images. I love tables, charts, that kind of thing, and just make sure they're quality images. Now we're going to talk about explaining visuals. So quite simply, we have visuals, and this is where you'll do a lot of your talking. There'll be a visual on your PPT, and then you want to talk about it. You want to explain the visual so that others around you can understand the presentation, can understand the visuals within the presentation. And so let's talk about showing your passion. Don't be bored. Don't look bored. Don't be boring. Don't just be passive. Be passionate. Make sure people see your honesty, your excitement. Be confident and show your knowledge. Don't say sorry. Be strong. So you start strong in the first 2 or 3 minutes, and these are the most important part because you want to hook people in. And at the beginning you want to engage people, make them feel interested, get them understanding what you're saying through your passion and your energy and your enthusiasm. Okay, so make sure you start strong, and then passively sitting and listening to speak. And we don't want to bore people, right? We want to give them something to have we want to give them something to focus on. We want to grab their attention, give them buzzwords and transitional words, and make them excited and interesting about what you're going to say. And then move away from the podium and computer. Don't stand behind the computer. I hate that when I see my students standing behind the computer and doing their presentation. Keep away from there. Make sure you walk around a bit, look at people, get rid of the barriers. Come and sort of build a rapport with them and make it more interesting by interacting more. And you can have a remote control. Some students bring them and use them to so they don't need to stand near the podium. They can just click the remote and ta-da! The PPT image changes. This allows you to be freed up to move around a bit, to connect with the audience. It gives you much more maneuverability and space. And you can use the keyboard in many ways. Some people use the B letter to blank out the screen. Sometimes you want to blank out the screen so you can get people to focus on you and what you want to say. It's not all about the PPT. It is about what you want to communicate with people. So again, we talked about eye contact before. So when you're giving and explaining your images, use that eye contact and look at people. Don't keep reading the screen. Don't keep looking up at the screen and reading off the screen. That's why I hate people reading the PPTs. Focus on people. Look at them. Smile at them. And make sure the lights are good ambience. Not too bright, not too dark. Make it a nice, relaxing environment. So if it's too dark, they'll only focus on the slides. So make it just a balance of light and dark to get people focusing on you and your presentation. Some of the problems that happen: people stand in front of the PPT or TV and block the view so people can't see. So what should you do in that case? Just stand to the side. Let people see the PPTs, but let them see you too, so that both are in focus. Another common mistake is gesturing using your wrong hand. make sure your hand which is closest to the PPT is there to make the gestures. So I would stand, if you're left-handed, stand on the right-hand side of the screen. If you're right-handed, stand on the left-hand side of the screen. Another problem is turning away from the audience. This happens when people want to read their PPTs. Make sure you do not do that. Hold your cards and read them from your hand if you have to, and make sure you always look at the people who are watching you. Don't turn away from them. Keep your eyes on them. Yes, it says it right here. Don't look at the TV. Don't look at the PPT. Focus on the audience. If you animate everything, and you can quickly glance to make sure it's gone to the next slide, but just make sure you gaze at the audience and not at the PPT. That's so distracting. And when you point the remote control, be careful about how quickly you change the slide. Only change it when you need to. Just be careful there, but just, you know, gently look to there to see if it's connected okay, and just do that just gently and carefully. So we've when you're doing visuals, you want to introduce them and explain them, and you want to emphasize them. These are the key points about explaining visuals. So we're going to talk about that a little bit now through these. Alright, so introduce the visual. Tell your audience what kind of visual it is. Here's a picture of, here's a graph, this bar graph, this pie chart tells us how good the Korean economy is right now. This pie chart tells us how scientists through the years, okay, then explain the different parts to the audience. So you look at a graph and you say, well, this section here talks about these kind of figures, and this section talks about another kind of figures. So make sure you explain those in more detail, flesh them out, and get the audience to understand. Now we're going to talk about some useful expressions. We're almost coming to the end now. These expressions should help you understand, or should help the audience understand what you want to say. So this also make your presentation more clear, more effective. Okay. So first of all, here's some really good phrases for the introduction. I'm going to tell you about the scientists who discovered the same scientific discovery at the same time in different parts of the world. How did they do that? Some people say it was plagiarism. Okay, there's one. And this is another one. There's another more introduction phrases. This information will help you come to terms with the changes in Korean society from a very Confucian society to a more modernized and democratic society. So that's a kind of another useful introduction. Here's another one. I'm going to talk about 3 things. These 3 things are how Korea went from being a monarchy to a dictatorship, and from a dictatorship to a democracy, and from a democracy to okay, whatever you want to say. And here we go. There's some more transitions here. These are transitional phrases. First, I'll talk about the monarchy in South Korea in the 1800s to begin with. Okay, so that's at the beginning. To start with, I'd like to talk about scientists in Korea from the 1500s. Okay, so something like that. And then second, I'll tell you about, I don't know, the occupation of Japan in Korea, or something like that, or the dictatorships in Korea in the 1940s, 50s, 60s and 70s and 80s. So you can just continue after that. I'd like to talk about and then thirdly, or finally, I want to talk about the transition into democracy and how now our government has a democracy, although it's not a perfect democracy. Lastly, I'd like to discuss the scientists in the 20th century in South Korea and what they've done to help Korean technology advance in this century. And there's more transitions here. I've shown you Next I'm going to talk about, I've shown you that Korea had a monarchy because of this, that and the other. Next I'm going to talk about how we became a dictatorship in the middle of the 20th century. Okay, so you just use these transitions. I've talked about this. Okay, so now the conclusion. Today I talked to you about the history of politics in Korea. I explained about the police force in South Korea. I told you about the economic situation in South Korea in the 20th century. I described why we have to continue with democracy, and then more. Don't forget that democracy is the best of all political systems, even though it has many failures. Please remember to wash your hands with alcohol before you leave the classroom. So lots of conclusion expressions there. So that's the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me in class.